Welcome to the Ministry Forum podcast, where we believe that you are not alone in your ministry journey. I'm the Reverend John Borthwick, your host, coming to you from the Center for Lifelong Learning at Knox College. Here we connect, encourage, and resource ministry leaders all across Canada in the joys, the struggles, and everything in between. I love that I get to do this work, and most of all that I get to share it with each and every one of you. So thanks for giving us a listen today. Whether you're a seasoned leader or just starting out, this podcast is made with you in mind. This week on the Ministry Forum podcast, we are in conversation with our good friend, the Reverend Dr. Glen Soderholm. And we're so excited to have Glen in our virtual studio today. And today we're all about experimenting. I'm going to try a totally different format from anything we've ever done before on the Ministry Forum podcast. And I thought Glen would be the perfect guy to experiment with. We're going to go unplugged, unscripted. Just two older, longtime ministry friends chatting. Because, you know, in the world of podcasting and social media these days, there just aren't enough places where you can hear old white guys yammer on about nonsense. I'm just saying, you know, this is going to be something. Ministry Forum community, we're glad that you are joining us and listening in. Glen, welcome, my friend. I'm delighted to be in conversation with you today on the Ministry Forum podcast.
Well, I am appreciative of your invitation, John.
You good? You feel safe in this moment? Like we're taking a risk. You have no idea what I might bring up.
I always feel safe in your hands, John.
And also with you. It's lovely. Well, why don't we start with telling the good people a little bit about yourself? I know you really well, but how would Glen like to introduce Glen's self? Maybe what's the origin story of the Soderholm, or fill in some blanks. Where I'll fill in some blanks as well along the way. But yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself, Glen.
Yeah, so born a baby boomer, born in the last month of the 50s, and born to Swedish immigrants who were wonderful Christian folk from the Swedish Pentecostal tradition. And I grew up in a very musical home. My dad was always a choir director, in the churches that we went to. He played piano and violin and sang, and it was a wonderful environment. And I'm very grateful because I've often said this. I did not have any deficits of love in my upbringing. My parents were strict. I mean, they were conservative evangelicals who, had a certain view of the world. But there was joy in our household and in our churches. And I loved church from the beginning. And we, because of my dad's role, and our families were always incredibly involved, we would be early there for choir practices, and usually the last ones to leave because my mom was the ultimate extrovert and host. And we went twice a day on Sundays. I mean, we were there all morning and then came back for the evening gospel service, and got involved in kids programs and youth group and all kinds of things. But I struggled, like most people, with the challenge of being Christian and being cool. Trying to grow up in a public school and be popular, but recognizing that I had this whole other story that was really defining of my life. A pretty important thing happened to me in my early teens when our church, and I grew up in Montreal actually, had a Jesus People revival. We had a youth pastor who went, and kids came to Christ out of the local community and the mall, and it was a real move of God, very, very profound. And so all these hippies started coming. This is about 1971, 72. So all these hippies started coming into our church, long hair, jeans, bare feet, halter tops. I mean, this, you can imagine, in a conservative, suburban, evangelical congregation, all these kids showing up. But, to their credit, and my parents and their peers, they welcomed these kids because they would they would stand out on the front steps and smoke after church. Now that was a big deal. And, we didn't boot them out. We just said, hey, come and be here and meet Jesus and see what happens. And the neat thing was that they brought electric guitars, and I had started playing a little guitar, but I had my answer. You could be cool and be a Christian, I mean, you could have long hair and play electric guitar. Now, my mom wouldn't even let me wear jeans to church. Forget about having long hair. So, but in any case, I had some role models there, and so at about 14, 15, I decided to take following Jesus seriously. I mean, it wasn't like it was an easy thing to do, but yeah, I knew that I was going to be a follower of Jesus at that point for the rest of my life, and because I was playing guitar and singing, I emerged into leadership pretty quickly in youth groups and things. And so we eventually moved down to Southern Ontario in the late 70s. And so I carried on with music and faith and in that tradition. But I was also restless and started to kind of ask big questions, right? And I can't go into all the details of this, but eventually I moved on from the Pentecostal church, and lo and behold, I was called into a parachurch ministry called Youth for Christ, doing a ministry amongst high school kids in Etobicoke, and I knew a woman at our office, an administrator who was at a Presbyterian church in Etobicoke, Grace Presbyterian on Renforth Drive, Centennial Park. And she said, well, why don't you come to our church one day? Because, there are kids from the school there. You may want to connect with them. And so I think I was 23 or 24, and I showed up at this Presbyterian church one morning, and I thought I'd landed on the moon. It was the strangest experience. Fourfold order of worship, gowns, litanies, book of praise. It was a whole other world. But I was young and idealistic, and so I decided to stick it out. And eventually, they invited me to integrate the high school ministry with youth ministry there, and we started a pretty cool youth group. Well, it was already going, but I got involved, and then we started an alternative service. And at that point, I felt called to ordain ministry. I met my wife, Sharon, at that point. This is in the 80s in Etobicoke, and we got married in 87. And I went to Knox College in 88, so for 3 years. And it was good. I mean, I like to use the analogy, John, of having a map that kept getting enlarged. I kept finding new countries and new oceans to travel and seeing a bigger world all the time. And so there was some pretty critical junctures along the way in terms of that map getting enlarged, stuff I was reading. And of course, Knox College expanded my horizons pretty dramatically. Had a pretty profound experience in my last year of seminary when I went to hear Henry Nouwen speak, and the West Toronto Presbytery brought him in, and he spoke, gave the lectures of what would eventually become the life of the beloved. And that night he talked about grace in a way I'd never really understood before, that our true identity is being the beloved children of God. And changed my life. I was undone in that meeting. I wept. I was a broken man, and I left and I came home and I said to my wife, I said, as we were looking for a call at that point, I know what my ministry is going to be. I'm going to tell people they're the beloved children of God, adopted in Christ. That's it. And I don't know if that's really changed all that dramatically, John. I think it's still pretty core to who I am and what I think is at the heart of doing ministry. We got called to Campbellville, Ontario, which is out here on the edge of Guelph and Milton, and I was there for 13 years in a 2-point charge. It was a good time. God was good to us. Learned a lot. Good things happened. Worship was an important thing to me with my music, and at that point, too, it's probably worth noting I started recording some of my own music and performing it, and people seemed to like it and asked for more, so I continued with that. So I was kind of juggling that with leading and ministering at the church. And so after 13 years, I resigned, and it felt like a real call, but I took a bit of a risk, and I started a ministry organization called Movable Feast Resources in 2004. And it was essentially a worship consulting ministry. So I started to travel across Canada and resource congregations on worship. I would lead praise. I would do seminars, teach. I would mentor younger worship leaders and pastors. I did concerts, conferences, all kinds of things. So did that for 8 years. And got to know our church very well. I mean, probably 60% of my work was in PCC congregations across the country. So I saw a lot of people, I met a lot of people, and it was a good education on the PCC. I'm assuming our listeners are mostly PCC, John. I may be wrong, but if people go beyond that, the Presbyterian Church in Canada
who's listening.
is what we're talking about.
But PCC, yes, for those who don't know, the Presbyterian Church in Canada's acronym is PCC.
Yeah, that's right.
It's our brand.
So near the end of that journey, I encountered an old friend, and he introduced me to, in one sense, missional church, but more kind of a idea around parish, the new parish ministry. There's a group called Parish Collective. I know you're familiar with them. I can say a bit more about that as we go, but I was invited to a conference, and at that point was feeling very strongly that the Spirit was guiding me back into parish ministry after having traveled for 8 years. And I knew I was supposed to do it in my neighborhood, which was essentially downtown Guelph, which was a stone's throw from where you were pastoring at St. Andrew's Church. And I remember, I mean, I was still a part of the presbytery and so on. And I remember thinking, well, I did go to them and say, I think God's calling me to plant a new church in the downtown, but there's already 2 big Presbyterian churches like right around the corner from me. I know what they're going to say. We're already struggling to fill them. Let's and so I remember very clearly going to you and Johan at Knox and sharing my vision, and to your credit and his, both of you were incredibly supportive and said, how can we help? You didn't feel territorial at all. And I said, I don't want to steal your sheep. I said, I mean, maybe 1 or 2 did come in the end. 1, I think, but the presbytery said yes. And I was a bit shocked because I was like, oh my goodness, I got to do this now. I had been trained as a church planter, but I did in the end realize I had the kind of the requisite sort of social gifts and skills to do this. And so we planted Two Rivers Church in my home here in downtown Guelph in essentially 2012, the summer and fall of 2012. And so I did that for 13 years. And thanks be to God, it remains, it exists. And if you know anything about the record of church plants in Canada, that is a gift. It's something that we can be very grateful for. And last December 31st of 2024, I retired officially from that role, and I remain connected to the congregation. But the last year and a bit, I have been up to other stuff in this new retirement gig. So that's a really quick overview. Chronologically and so on of where I've been, what I'm doing. So yeah,
I love it. It's a great map of where you've been. And I discovered, as you do, whenever you sit around and chat with somebody for a while, you discover new things. I don't recollect it. It probably came up in our conversations, but I don't recollect your time in Etobicoke and Grace Church and stuff like that, because my first call was to Rexdale in West Toronto Presbytery, and certainly knew a lot of those connections in Etobicoke, and the Rexdale Alliance was still very, very a going concern. It probably still is today in some ways, and definitely all the different ways in which that community within Toronto had a variety of gifted leaders at different times, and certainly the season that I was there. Continued to have a heart for reaching out to high school and young people, whether it was hoops and hustle, I think was one of the things. I remember Rexdale Alliance had they called it the Grapevine, because right across from Rexdale Alliance was a high school, and they basically did a ball hockey thing that they ran, and they called it Grapevine. It was before Don Cherry's moving along from his thing. But basically, they would play ball hockey with kids and have a great time. And there'd be these intermissions. And during the intermissions, they would sort of do some conversations with young people about God and
Yeah.
faith and all those kind of things. It was a great model. So yeah, that's really interesting.
There was a guy named Buddy Burge, and I mean, it was a great move of God in the 70s and into the 80s in those schools in Etobicoke. And there's a lot of Christian leaders that exist today because of that ministry. And so it was a good time to be there. Reverend Terry Samuel, well known in our church, he married my wife and I and baptized my first daughter. And so very grateful for that connection. Yeah.
And also a rock star, Terry Samuel, similar to yourself, because Terry was a part of a trio of minister guys.
I think a quartet,
Spencer,
I think.
Or a quartet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forget what they called themselves. Do you remember?
Yeah. I don't know. Was Ian McPherson part of that?
Ian McPherson, I thought, was a part of it. Bob Spencer, maybe, a couple others. Yeah, like a little singing troupe. But I say that because our friendship began. This may surprise some of the listeners on the Ministry Forum community. My meeting of Glenn happened when I was doing an internship as a part of my Knox College time at Hopedale Presbyterian Church, which is now I think Knox, Oakville East or West?
West, probably.
West. Yeah. West, I think, as they've kind of amalgamated in some way. But funny enough, a Ministry Forum audience, I was tasked, as churches do. You are young and you're going to seminary, so hey, why don't you lead our youth group? And as a kid who never didn't really go to church in an active way, didn't do camping, didn't do when we did go to church for a time in my younger years, I refused to go to church school because I didn't like coloring pictures of Jesus. Not sure why. So I had to sit quietly in the sanctuary. And as a young person, I was 13 when we started to go to St. David's in Hamilton after my grandfather had passed suddenly, and we took Grandma to church. And St. David's Presbyterian Church in Hamilton, I've talked about this before, I think, on the Ministry Forum, was it mostly older adults, and there was hardly any young people, and I was the young person in the church. Never did camping ministry or anything like that. So I was never a part of a youth group or anything like that. So here I am, an intern, allegedly running a youth group. Those dear kids who were full on, like whatever it was called. I think it might have been called Rise Up way back then, where the PCC did little events like that. And they also were triennium kids. They had been to triennium.
Right.
So basically they taught me a lot. But one thing that you and John Jareen and Colleen Smith, I think,
yes,
over at Knox Milton did was you did something called, I feel like it was called On Solid Rock. Is that what it was
possible?
Called?
It's possible.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, where you guys would basically organize with all your youth groups, and you invited Hopedale as well. And so I came, and I had no gifts. You guys had all the music stuff, and you would do a little music thing. And I know I've told you the story a million times, and I love telling it because you said that you weren't cool. I can remember coming home with Kate, my partner, from youth group with a couple of young people in the back, young girls, and they were like, did you see Glenn's shoes? He was wearing Hush Puppies, and they were like, he's the coolest. And so you were like a cool Rev, playing your guitar, wearing your Hush Puppies, and doing the thing. And I was certainly glad of those nights when we got to collaborate. That was the first time I met you.
Have Hush Puppies ever been cool? I don't know. I guess they have in a certain demographic. Yeah.
I think that was the question I asked Kate after the young people had left our vehicle. I'm like, Hush Puppies, are they cool? But I guess they're cool now. They were cool then.
Who knows? I mean, this is the
cool.
90s.
You were also a shoe guy, let me just say, right? I don't know if that's still a thing for you, but you liked a good pair of shoes.
Well, I attribute anything that's good about what I wear to my wife, and I take no responsibility.
All right. And then our second interaction was still at Knox College. I ended up convincing Stuart McDonald, now retired from Knox College, to let me have the opportunity of doing an MDiv thesis, which wasn't often done. And I did mine on small group ministry. It was around the time in the church's life, the wider church even, when Bill Eastham came to town for a bit, a guy who wrote Sacred Cows Make Gourmet Burgers.
That's it.
Very much about small group ministry being the thing. And I was bearing witness to some churches that I knew of who were going all in, Presbyterian churches, and saying, we got to have small groups, and this is what's really important. And I remember connecting with Grace Presbyterian Church. I remember connecting with Jan Haminga, who was at Knox Oakville, who was with Harry McWilliams, who was the minister there at the time. Jan went on to be also a student at Knox and also then served Grace Presbyterian for a time. And they were really passionate. They went down to Indianapolis and visited a church that was doing small group ministry. So they were one of my studies of like a large church that's going to implement small group ministry. And there was another couple of things in my thesis, but one of the things was I'm going to go talk to Glen because I know that Glen does small groups in some way. And that was my second interaction with you. And I remember distinctly in that time, I think you had been there for maybe 9 years when I talked to you. And it was a bit, I'm really dumbing it down. And that's what this, when you don't script a podcast, you're pulling it out of your brain. But I do remember it being a significant moment for my own formation in ministry where you may have not said the what you mentioned about Henry Nouwen and I'm just going to create a beloved community, but you had essentially that kind of thing where it was, what I've hoped I've done over these 9 years is just love these people as best I can, and created a space where people could explore their spirituality, their faith, their walk with Jesus, and discipleship was certainly a big part. And I know it's a big passion of yours, and you had done that in that community. So I was always grateful for that time we shared together. And also you just knew everybody, and that's just continued. Like you knew all the characters of like, and we had an interaction just recently where I'm like, hey, have you ever heard of a guy who wrote a book? And you're like, oh yeah, he was in my house. We had coffee or something, or we went to the local coffee shop together, or he slept in my basement in a sleeping bag or something. I'm like, how do you know these people? And your greatest claim to fame, to me, at a certain season of life was you were like, yeah, I was driving through the U.S. after a conference or something, and I just happened to go and hang out in Brian McLaren's kitchen and had a chat. And I was so delighted when we got Brian to come to University of Guelph, and I invited you along because I thought you might want to carry on that kitchen chat, and that was good.
Yeah, you
so
did.
Yeah, number of different intersections that we've had over this season of life and ministry.
Yeah, John, it's been great. And when I moved into the downtown of Guelph and back in 2011 now, and to know that you were just around the corner was great. And but in a way, these things haven't changed for me. So whatever I was trying to communicate to you in the year 2000, if it was 9 years or so, is still happening for me right now. Like, and because you actually experienced this yourself last fall as you joined one of our living rooms. So this is what we call our small groups at Two Rivers Church in Guelph. And they're not, they are small groups, but we think of them as house churches in a way. And I think there are some distinctions there, because they have a kind of liturgical form. But I think the point of them is this sense of accompaniment, right? That we are not alone. And I know that's a theme for the Ministry Forum, but my experience has been a lot of churches. People come to church, but they're still alone. They do not have those thick ties that I think are essential for the health of a church or a congregation, a place where people can be themselves. The values we describe are, every voice matters, face-to-face church in a circle. Those are key values. And if people, I know it's a very big deal to talk about feeling safe these days. And I think I have some quibbles with that, but I think that there is, because faith is not safe and following Jesus is not safe, but I get what people are saying. It's a scary world. And when people feel the weight of oppression and the violence of oppressors, clearly we want to feel safe and know there's a community that we can be ourselves and so on. And so that safety is a good kind of safety, right? Where you can disagree about something. You can wrestle openly with your faith and uncertainty and all that stuff, but you're welcome, and people will hold that with you. And so I think I probably wouldn't have used that language back when I first was talking to you, but it feels like the same thing is happening. I'm using slightly different language and maybe adding some wisdom I've learned over the years about how to do it better. Probably I say less now than I used to. It's easy to want to be the Bible answer man, as has been said in the past, and so, but letting everyone speak from their hearts and receiving those things. So yeah, I still think it's key to being healthy church.
Yeah, giving people space to share where they're intersecting with whatever they're hearing, what they're wrestling with, being able to express their doubts. What I loved about experiencing Living Room, that Two Rivers Church models so very well and under your leadership and continues in other living rooms, not just your own. You're not the only leader of a living room, either in the past when you were serving as their pastor and now as you're continuing to connect with them as a member or a community member. What I love about how it was modeled was you made it liturgical in creating that safety, in the sense of, and you'll be able to quote it better than me because I have a terrible memory, but after anybody shares whatever they brought, there is a line that's used, and you can say it.
We thank you for your offering. We listen for God's word.
Yeah. And it's just that space is held that you can share as much as possible, and also know that, and I think we don't model this always well in conversation, in podcasts even sometimes that I listen to sometimes, where we let someone just share. Like we just give them space to share, and then we don't interject, we don't interrupt, we don't criticize or check, or even in the midst of the holding, there's also a sense that the vulnerability that happens in that sharing, sometimes, how we're all wired, sometimes we want to rescue, we want to contradict what someone might say about themselves, we want to protect. And it's like, in this moment, you're just allowed to share vulnerably exactly whatever it is you need to share. And then we're going to close like we do with everybody. And then we will come back and offer some, thoughts, perspectives, insights, how whatever you said moved me, what I heard and what I needed to hear from God in the midst of the sharing. And I just thought it was such a beautiful, I know I said in the room many times, I've been in ministry a long time, not as long as you, sir, because you're a little older. But man, I had never experienced a group of people who went so deep, so fast, and shared so vulnerably and so richly of the gamut of how one might express a relationship and walking with Jesus and engaging with Scripture and being someone who's trying to be faithful in the midst of all that. Well, it was a gift. It was a gift.
Good. Thanks, John. Yeah. And probably you bore witness to the fruit. A number of the people in that particular living room were veterans, I think. Most were.
Classic. It was the classic. Glenn.
It was. We called it the classic. Yeah, that's true. And but that took years to cultivate, right? And I think the word that came to mind as you were talking about that is honoring. So we are honoring where people are at and what they're saying, and then making room later for an engagement, which could be a wrestling, and doesn't mean you can't disagree either. There's no fear in disagreeing with someone or saying, I wrestle with that, or I struggle with what you're saying, but thank you. There's that great New Testament word forbearance, right? And it's just a couple of times in the New Testament, but it's a beautiful word. We need a lot of forbearance right now, as the polarization effect is full on currently. Yeah.
Well, I think related to that, what another intersection that you and I had in our early relationship building was, I spoke of how you with the cool shoes, playing the guitar and all that for the youth group. A year or more later, I run into you again, and we interview each other and talk about small group ministry at St. David's in Campbellville. And I got called to Rexdale and served in Etobicoke. And I think what you're talking about is this sense of accompaniment and coming alongside and journeying together with people. We need people, not being alone, right? And one of the things that a guy in the presbytery modeled, who I know was a good friend of yours as well, he did this thing as a minister, and I did it in as an example. I did it for my entire time in presbyteries. When I arrived, and friends who are younger in the Ministry Forum podcast, we used to not have computers, and we would get these things that come in paper that are in envelopes called letters. And this minister at Humber Heights Presbyterian Church had sent me a letter, being my first day and it was on my desk on my first day at Rexdale Presbyterian, was an invitation to lunch. Welcome to Presbytery. Here's an invitation to lunch. A good man named Brian Ross. And we went to lunch, and he said this. This invitation is for today, is a one-off. It can be, this is it. Because it's on you to reciprocate. If you want to do this again, reach out and we'll do it again. And that turned into a 5-year relationship while I was in West Toronto, where we'd go for lunch every so often. And Brian, for some people who may not know him, served in ministry for many, many years, and he self-described himself as a super conservative. That's how he described himself. And so we didn't always see eye to eye theologically at times, but we were able to hold space for each other, able to listen deeply to each other, and walk that journey together, and hold each other, whatever was going on, whether it was in our congregational life or our personal life, together. So I remember when I was moving on to St. Andrews in Guelph, and I said to him, well, Brian, I guess, it's been good, and hope, if you're ever out in the Guelph area, or if I'm ever in Toronto, I hope we'll see each other again. And I wasn't sure what we would see. And he's like, well, who said this had to stop? And I'm like, well, it's so far away or something. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, I go and meet a guy in Campbellville for breakfast every so often. His name is Glen Soderholm. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Glenn, really? And he said, and you would be welcome to join us for that breakfast. And so for a season, you and I and Brian hung out and had breakfast together until I think he moved on to Nova Scotia and or New Brunswick, and I lost touch with him, and I'm sure maybe you were able to keep in touch for a little bit. But I think part of that is, a diversity of perspective, holding space for each other in the midst of all that, and living life together, and accompanying each other through the hard times and the good times of everything, the gamut of what ministry is. And what we try to model, I think, at Ministry Forum is you shouldn't do this alone. And I don't know if I learned it. Part of it was probably through Brian's counsel, maybe as a little bit, but I remember saying to ministers when I would first meet them and I would invite them to lunch, they'd be like, oh, I don't know if I have time for that. And I'm like, you don't eat ever? And they're like, well, yeah. I'm like, you need to make time for lunch. Just a lunch, it's nothing. And then I did that in Guelph, in the city of Guelph, where I would convene all the downtown Old Stone Church ministers, and we just had lunch. But that lunch was always so much more than that. But it wasn't an agenda. It wasn't, some kind of advocacy. We're all going to do something big. It was just like, let's just have lunch together, because we've got something in common, and it helped us to feel not alone. Yeah.
And you continue to do that with the Beer Town pastors, I call them. And
yes, indeed. That's turning into the retirees club, really.
Yeah.
And a couple of working stiffs that still have jobs. But it's been a good place for people to have community and hold each other through whatever's been going on in the life of ministry.
And when you say that, there is the language I like to use is faithful presence, being faithfully present to one another, but also being faithfully present in the neighborhood, being faithfully present to neighbors, friends, strangers, enemies. but I don't know. For whatever reason, this thought has come to mind. Speaking of that particular individual who, yeah, paid the same kind of attention to my early days in ministry, to a company, but also I knew prayed for me, and I think that we have these things to offer. We have the chance to offer our presence physically and be with, and I think that's very, very important. But to know that somebody actually is holding you up in prayer is also an incredible thing. If I look back on my life and was able to count the number of people who at least said that they were praying for me, and I believed a lot of them, and because I know myself, and I know that I say that to people sometimes a bit too flippantly, and don't follow through as well as I should. But I also try to follow through, and I think there's a real beautiful ministry in holding up people in that way, and it's just another way of being accompanying. I think that we put Christ between us and them in one sense, and trust that something's getting through the Spirit, right?
Yeah, and again, as ministry leaders or as clergy, I think that's something that we miss out on a lot. There's a lot that's been meant to pour out from us, and there's not always a lot of pouring into us. And the incredible gift, I know you've prayed for me. I know that Brian prayed for me often, and hopefully I prayed for you all sometimes as well. But just that sense of someone holding space for you in prayer as a meaningful, a gift that's beyond what we often in serving others so often miss out on in some ways. Who's praying for you when you do all the praying for everybody else? It's a good question to be asking. Yeah.
Well, I think sometimes you have to ask. I know people who very specifically create support prayer teams for themselves. Just the recognition is, I'm going to connect with you every month or every other month, and I'm going to share with you some of the things that I will need some help with. And I think it's a marvelous thing to do, but it takes vulnerability. It takes putting it somewhere in your priority list as well. We're always being thrown back on ourselves, right? And that's part of the late modern sort of sensibility, the self being our authentic selves and independent selves and so on. And it's just the air we breathe. And so it's swimming against the tide to be someone who asks for help. And we need help. You need help. I need help. We all need it. And it's so critical to admit it, to invite it. Has to be a posture, I think.
Yeah. And you raised it up a little bit related to the living rooms with Two Rivers, but also the sense of that companionship in ministry, that friendship in ministry, also holding each other accountable. And I'll give you huge credit, Glenn, for the number of times where there may have been seasons of my life in ministry where I wasn't open and receptive to hearing Glenn's thoughts on what I was thinking or what I was doing or whatever. But just, the gift that comes from trusting another person to sometimes say to you, hey, I think you're on the wrong track, or hey, that's really not good. I don't think that's a good way to be thinking about that. Or, just challenging, offering a counter way of going, because sometimes we choose, if we do find people to accompany us on this journey of life, sometimes the people we choose, due to whether or not they don't want to be disruptive or have conflict, or they're worried about losing the relationship or something, there's a lot of people who you might find in your life who are just going to be like, yeah, that sounds great. Do whatever you're doing. You're doing great. Celebrate you. It's all great. Great.
Yeah, it's all good. Yeah, or the whatever. that
Yeah.
you do you.
You do you.
Yeah. And
Yeah, and there's a sense, and I think it's definitely modeled in the relationship that we see borne out in the Gospels with Jesus and the disciples. I mean, we make fun of a person like Peter, but at least in the group, he was at least somebody who was going to say to Jesus, "Hey, I think you're way off base, pal. Like, this is not a good idea."
yeah.
And then Jesus is fairly open to saying, "Get behind me, Satan," and all that kind of stuff. Like,
Yeah.
they had that kind of relationship that didn't break the relationship, maybe made it stronger. That it was, it had enough within it that it could be held in that, despite difference, despite a need to call each other to account and hold each other accountable. And that's part of what the imagining of small group ministry is about, but also part of what mentorship and peer connections are about. Communities of practice can sometimes be that way too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that it needs to be said that the foundation for all of that is trust. It's interesting. I was meeting with my spiritual director yesterday, and I was telling her about a word that I had heard at the beginning of this year, which I really felt was practice joy. So my resistance to the powers that are in play at the moment, and which all of us feel the oppression of very strongly. What means do we have to resist? And obviously there are times where we have to do nonviolent resistance and make ourselves known and speak the truth to power. Although I think there's always a caution there, because if you think that you're always right and that you have the complete right answer, and you speak that to power all the time, then we just need to be very self-aware before we do that. But I felt like one way we can resist is by practicing joy. And she said to me something along the lines of, well, how would you do that? Like, what's at the foundation of practicing joy? And we started talking about trust, and as being this kind of text, for any practice that we want to do. And so just even in what you're describing, John, I hope that, I mean, we never had a formal intervention with you, although I'm sure a few were required. But yes, I think that we had enough trust with each other that truth telling could be done, and it flowed both ways, I think. And so creating that kind of place where, well, have you thought about it this way? Or, I'm concerned for you, let's just think about, maybe you want to think about this. And I hopefully you always heard it in love. But accountability is not a swear word. It's a good word. Just as long as it's not wielded by someone. And that's where the danger has come. Sometimes when people use that, it's wielded by a sort of someone higher, the master and the servant. But, I love Eugene Peterson's definition of spiritual direction as more as two people paying attention to God together, what is God up to? And that may include, sort of seeing something that you hadn't seen before about a direction or thought. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, Glenn, I'm wanting to, I'm going to ask something huge of you, in the sense of, how do you summarize? How do you pull out your years of congregational ministry? How do you being able to look back on the years of congregational ministry that you did, as you described in your introduction? What bubbles up to the surface for you? What are the things that you would say that you'd either want to offer in a, for ministers who are out there, or lay people who might need to hear what a minister might reflect upon over a long journey of obedience in the same direction? What bubbles up to the surface for you?
I wish there was some magical formula or solution that you could offer to everyone. Here it is. I keep coming back to wanting to be alive in Christ. I think that it begins in kind of the who question. It's we tend to drift to the what and how question pretty quickly and bypass the who. But I think that the biggest learning in ministry is seeing everything as a gift, just starting out with the recognition that life is a gift, that grace is a gift, that worship is a gift, that ministry is a gift that we get to participate in. So you'll hear me saying that a lot wherever I am. And so why I think that's really important is that if you really can dwell in that, it takes away the ego. That ministry is done out of a sense that I'm participating in what God is up to in Christ through the Spirit. It's not about Glenn or John or our gifts. Yes, we offer our gifts, but we get in on what God is already doing. And so a lot of people in ministry, I think, feel they got to come and fix things and fix people and come up with some new formula or technique to find success. And I just don't think we're the ones who create the success. I think there's this wonderful letter Thomas Merton wrote to a friend of his in ministry that I have just turned to over and over and again through the years. But it starts off, it says, do not depend upon the hope of results. Because as soon as you do, you're heading down the wrong way. And so if one can humbly come amongst a group of people and bear witness to Christ, to God at the center of all things, and say, let's offer our gifts together and recognize that the being together is about pleasing God. It's about being obedient in one sense. We listen. I mean, we are called and sent. So we are being obedient. And then we look for strength from elsewhere, from the Spirit. We ask for it, we invite it. And we just try to get out of the way. And we use this word accompaniment a lot, but I just keep coming back to it. Hopefully, in my experience, this sort of quiet role of faithful presence, of accompanying, walking with folk. Actually, there was a minister in our denomination. I think his name is Lonnie Wilkinson. I don't know if you know him, but he wrote a D-Min thesis. I remember this. It's called "Following from in Front," and I love that. Following Jesus. Atkinson. What did I say? Wilkinson. Yeah, Atkinson.
Lonnie. Yeah, Lonnie, he was a singer too, right?
Oh man, he would start. He'd launch into a song in the middle of a sermon. He had amazing
He's
voice.
On social. He's on the social media these days. Yeah, he's doing his singing. Yeah, you should check him out. Yeah.
Well, I haven't talked to him in a very long time.
Right.
I loved the title of his D-Min thesis. Anyways, Following from in Front, and because there's a humility in that. Like your gifts. Leading is important. I'm not trying to say we're not called to lead, but the posture of your leadership is one of being a follower and offering your gifts. And and as you know, I'm a pretty big supporter of the APES notion. If people don't know what that is, that's a thinking about ministry and leadership in a church based on the giftings in Ephesians 4, apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers, which the acronym is APES. And the recognition that the church that we have inherited has been really led by its shepherds and teachers, and so a church will look a certain way when those gifts are the most prominent. But if you bring in your apostles, prophets, and evangelists, you get a different kind of ministry happening. And so I think one thing I've tried to do, I'm not sure I've done it well, but is invite other people's gifts into the center. And so I think that if I can keep, I don't want to throw, comes from T.F. Torrance, but this happens in preaching and all kinds of things, is you don't want to throw people back on themselves. And that's so easy for preachers to do, right? You can talk about grace, but then often we think we have to make an application at the end, which is that, so here's now what you need to go out and do. Now, I'm not
Right.
saying we don't need to talk about what we're called to do. There's lots to do. But the first word to us, again, is gift and grace. And let's not throw people back onto themselves. Let's throw them onto Christ. Cast your cares upon him. Um, and I think that if we can cultivate that sort of space where people are engaging in their faith that way, then they will do the right thing. Because if you know God's heart, then you will be compelled to act in his name, to go and to love and serve and pursue justice and truth and all these things in the world. So and I think that creating an intimacy is important where it isn't about one person, who's the authority at the front doing all the stuff, but creating space where people can do as we've already talked about quite a bit. I think speak and be heard and practice the faith together. So I think small is good. We tend to think that it looks good if it's big, but I think more and more the future of the church is going to be the micro church. It's going to be people satisfied with not having a lot of fancy things, but essentially having each other in a home in some place. So it's okay to be small. That's something I've been learning to be satisfied with, because, ego wants to be able to say, hey, look how many people we have coming, I mean, you can get a lot of people together doing bad things or unhelpful things or unhealthy things. It's hard to get perspective and self-transcendence.
Well,
I don't know if that's what you were wanting
no
to
agenda,
hear,
my
but
friend. I think what I hear in some of that, and what I want to also raise up as an inspiration to me when I was in ministry, in congregational ministry, having those breakfasts with you, there was that sense, what always sort of, I saw it as brave. I don't feel you never did it in my estimation in a cavalier or egotistical way, but you were always really clear about where your giftedness was as the minister, or as a member of the community who happens to be the minister, maybe is a better way of phrasing it, and clear where your gifting wasn't. And you were very willing to put that out front in the congregation that you were a leader of, and invited other leaders to step into the gaps that you were not going to fill. And as I've talked to ministry leaders for years, and including myself, I've had, I've dabbled occasionally. There's often been I think what I've heard people articulate is a kind of a fear. Can I actually say that to a church? Because in our denomination, I think so many of us are called to be generalists. Like, can you be good at everything?
right.
Like, I referenced that youth group at Hopedale. No disrespect to the good people of Hopedale, but they should not have put me as a youth leader at Hopedale Church for even just that 1 year. That wasn't where my gifting lied, or lay, as it were. Also, speaking isn't a good gift, clearly. But there's that kind of thing. Like, we often pick warm bodies for volunteer positions or blah blah blah. But even in ministry, it's like I'm often pleasantly warmed, if I could say that in a way, cheered by hearing a church that says, we've discerned as a church. This is the session, say, for example, or the leaders of the leadership of a church saying, yeah, we've discerned that one of our minister's gifts is not this. And so we've actually encouraged our minister not to do that. And I'm like, oh, what a gift to your minister, because many ministers are not good at saying, I'm really not good at this. And it's not a cop out, because I do remember somebody in the church I served saying one time that if you've led by giftedness, it gives you an easy out of just not doing the things that are hard or difficult. And it's like, that's not true. That's not. There are things that I will have to do. I'm open to that. but it's more about if you can, and we know this, taking it out of the church setting. I've done a lot of work in the area of like stress and trauma and burnout and stuff like that. And one of the protective factors around burnout is if people can be able to do the things, the job, whatever that is most suited to them, like that they're wired for, that they have a passion for. And I know lots of people in ministry who feel like they spend the majority of their time doing the things that they're not wired for, that they don't feel particularly competent in. They're trying their best, but it's hard for them. And they don't get enough of those pieces that can give them that little boost in ministry to feel like, yeah, this is my thing. I got this. I love this. This is where I flow. This is where I feel like I'm really engaged in doing something and connecting to God in a bigger way, and the community in a bigger way. Yeah. So I just offer a sense of gratitude that you were always willing to model that in the church you served, and probably modeled it to me and to many other kinds of leaders to sort of think about that.
Thanks, John. I am, sometimes in fun ways, we break life down into simple binaries, even though we know life is way more complex than that. But I sometimes use the language. I said, is that life-giving or is it life-taking?
Right.
And it's a good question to ask in a lot of settings. Now, sometimes life-giving might mean doing something you don't want to do, but you realize in the end it is a life-giving thing to do. But I want to just riff on what you said for a second, because, as we think about the church today, here's the word that comes to me. You might have been at this presbytery meeting, but we had some consultant come into our presbytery and do a whole spiel about, contextual ministry and what's our culture like, and here's why the church is failing, and so on and so forth. And we're trying to hire them to teach us how to do something. And I've heard a lot of these things before, as I'm sure you have too. But I stood up in that presbytery meeting and I said, this is all great. This isn't anything we haven't heard before. But I said, I have one question for you. He says, can you teach us courage? And, and he sort of hemmed and hawed a little bit. But I think it's such an important word, because it isn't about ego. It's about risk. It's about, sometimes saying the hard things or doing the thing that in the end is going to be the life-giving thing. But we so need courage, John, right now. We need courage to love, right? We need courage to love those who are not easily lovable. We need courage to love our neighbors. We need to take risks in the name of Christ, through the power of the Spirit. And so that's sort of coming back round to this safe word, right? And people can only do what they're capable of doing. Don't get me wrong. I'm aware that there are people who, for different reasons, because of trauma and so on and so forth, are limited. But it's back to C.S. Lewis and Aslan's he's not a tame lion. So can we find that courage, and perhaps what we need is, we can find it when we are accompanied, I believe. We can't do it alone, for sure. And I think that's why Jesus always sends out his disciples in twos, right? In those stories and in the New Testament. And we even have this sort of rule of thumb at Two Rivers around starting a living room or a learning room, a small group of some kind. It's like, we're a permission-giving church. If you want to do something, go. But you have to find one other person to accompany you. You can't start it on your own. And if you can persuade one other person this is a good vision and try it, then you're free to start and see if you can get other people to join you. And so that's why it's critical to go find your people and then take some risks. In Jesus' name.
Well, and the mantra that I sort of tried to embody, and still to this day do, but definitely needed to use the mantra a lot in congregational ministry, was I want to be fearless, but not reckless. And
nice.
So the nuance for me in my personality was that I wanted to know. I wanted to be fearless, like that. I'm not afraid to make decisions, to move forward, to say things, to do things, to act, or whatever that might be. Um, but that I do things with intention. Like that if someone was to come after me and say, "Why did you do that?" or "Why did you say that?" or "Why would you act in that way?" I would always know why, like for myself. That I would always discern that why. Um, and that helped me not to be reckless, just do things for the sake of disrupting. I am disruptive. It's part of who I am.
No.
We won't go down the Enneagram. I know that's a good thing for you, but I am an 8,
Ah,
and
I don't think I knew that. Well, that's
yeah,
interesting. Okay.
yeah, kind of an intense one.
Yeah, I can see
Fairly
it.
integrated. When I've said it to others, they sort of go, "Oh yeah, yeah, definitely, guaranteed." So yeah, I do like to disrupt. I like to do the things I do, but I do it with intention, and I know what I'm doing. And if someone was to call me on it, I'd say I chose to do that action or to say that thing or to participate in that because of this, that, and the other. And that's sort of kept me balanced, I think, because I know I have the propensity to get reckless if I want to.
Mm.
And so that courage that's sort of checked by a sense of your own integrity, doing the work, knowing who you are as a person, all those kinds of things are really, really a part of it. And also having some social awareness of like, if you're going to just act in your own way with your own script all the time, how is that impacting everybody around you in your closer relationships and the wider relationships? So really having a sense of that as you go. And that's hard. That's a journey of a lifetime. And as you've described, you've had a good lifetime already and much more to come. Um, I wonder if we could get a thought or two just related to what's been life giving as you've taken the first few bites of retirement. Maybe telling a good friend, what does it look like out there? Like I'm still a little ways away, but what does it look like out there, Glenn? Tell me, tell me what it looks like and what's been life giving so far. Because I know you're
Um,
still working, and we all get that. You're still doing stuff, you're still doing things, but officially, you've retired from, shall we say, congregational ministry and formal leadership as a pastor. Is that a
yeah,
thing? I'm giving you all the words. I don't know how we even define this. What does retirement even look like?
yeah. Well, that's that whole business between the difference between your vocation and your occupation, right?
There
And
you go.
my
Yeah.
vocation to follow Christ, to know the word that sustains the weary is will forever be my vocation. And so I would say one of the nice things is being able to just let go of some feeling like you're always have to be responsible for something. Now, you always have some responsibilities, and now the domestic ones take on uh, a little more priority, stuff that
Would you
you've
call it like?
ignored for years. Pardon me?
Would you call it like laying down the mantle, like carrying that mantle of ministry,
Oh,
being able to set that down or set it aside? Because I've always described intermissions as that, like,
yeah.
or having the opportunity for a sabbatical is like just for a brief time you get to put it down. But my hope is that retirement looks a bit more like, no, this is fully down now, and I get to participate in the things that either I must attend to or I can choose to attend to.
Yeah, I mean, when you're in leadership and you are responsible to guide a community, to be answerable to your judicatory, whether it's a presbytery or diocese or whatever, all those things carry a weight that, yes, could feel like a mantle or a straitjacket, or depending on what's going on. Um, so it's been nice to step out from under that and say, someone else is in charge, and that's great. So there's a little more independence, but I don't want to, I don't want to flow into the negative side of that.
Mhm.
I think you just take a little bit longer to do things. You don't have to rush so much, which is great. I mean, I'm an early riser as it is, but I've actually been sleeping a little more in the mornings, which is a bit weird, but it's okay. Yeah, there's nothing pushing me right out of bed, and so that's okay. Yeah, there's just a bit more freedom, but you also get to do some of the things that you wanted to do and you couldn't. So reading Moby Dick right now. I'm that is connected to another thing I continue to do is be a part of a book club in downtown Guelph here. But yeah, that novel or that thing that you always said, I'm not gonna have time to read that. I mean, I read it way back in undergrad, but so that's kind of fun. And but I'm also aware that there are things to do. So my vocation will still find some places to emerge in other respects. And I think I'm some of that is to do with the work I'm doing in our denomination. Some of that I think is still inchoate. It's still waiting to happen. And I am looking forward to seeing so I'm 66. So I still have a fair bit of energy for life and reasonably fit and so on, and I have health, so I'm grateful for that. And so, what's in store? What's God got in store? I don't know. It's kind of cool to think about. I imagine we're going to continue to stay here in downtown Guelph. We have a daughter who lives across the country in Vancouver, but we have another daughter who's right here in Guelph, and so we love our place. We are still committed to our neighborhood. I've kind of made that vow 15 years ago, is that I'm going to the wisdom of stability, as Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove calls it. And so I want to continue to inhabit that stability, to be faithfully present for those neighbors we've built strong relationships with. And I manage a community garden here in the downtown and so on. So I want to keep doing those things. And that's part of what I've been called to do. I actually want to write more music again. So I have recorded a number of CDs, but it's been 15 years, and I've got a few songs percolating, and I was thinking, do I have another album in me? I when I think about Dylan and Neil Young and Paul Simon, these guys in their 80s recording and touring, I think, okay, I still have some concerts and things left in me here, so I'm hoping to do some of that and
lace up those hush puppies, get the tour going again.
Shoe shopping. I mean, I got more time for that. So
that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Wow. Well, you teased it a bit. You are hanging out with the national office. I hear.
Yes.
You got a little gig there. Do you want to give us a sense of what you're up to at the national office of the Presbyterian Church in Canada and the gift that you're bringing to that community and the things you're doing? Yeah.
So the PCC created an initiative back in the teens called Cyclical PCC, which was essentially a church planting network. That was kind of the idea. Now, COVID unfortunately knocked it out out of commission in some ways, as it did so many things. And so I've been involved in that network as a coach and so on for some time, but they invited me to give leadership to it when a previous leader had stepped away. And so I took that on a temporary basis, but then they invited me to take it on with more responsibility. So that began this year. So 2 days a week I oversee. Well, we're still in the midst of trying to find a name for it all. So I won't say what I think the name is, but I will say that at least my intention is to help create a missional network in the denomination. And so that would involve encouraging people to evangelism. It would involve encouraging church planting, something that I believe in strongly, and I think has to happen in our denomination going forward. And then to any leader or layperson, whatever, who would like to learn more about what does it mean to live missionally, to be a resource for those folk and to network people, like-minded people in that sense. So I am doing that in a fairly low-key way right now. I have a cohort that I'm building. If you want John in the notes following this, you can tell people I'll give you my email address for my work, and they can, if they want to be on my updates and to find out when we meet and gather and so on, then I'm happy to have people join that group. So it's in development and process, but there are some cool things happening in the country. and fresh expressions, some people call them. There's different language for it, but we want to foster that kind of creativity and imagination in ministry. The language cyclical used was faithful innovation. Our friend Andy Root doesn't love the word innovation, and that's you can read his whole book about it. But in any case, it's useful word in some respects, and I think the qualifier of faithful helps. So if people are interested in that and trying some new ministry, as Jesus is making all things new, then let's support that. We want to support that and find ways of getting them funding and accompaniment and coaching and all that stuff. So that's jazzing me right now, and because I believe in it. So yeah.
Well, and I hope people have heard through this conversation that certainly it's an area where your gifts are meeting a need and certainly a passion, I think, that's needed within our denomination at a time such as this, because so often the narrative is very bleak, very sad, that folks are feeling like there's no hope or what's coming next, or decline is the only answer. I think this is a long conversation in varieties of spaces and places, but just sort of the notion of, what does success look like, and is small or micro actually where we need to be going? And when we're talking about the power of being in a living room with a few people, being at a coffee shop or a lunch spot with 2 or 3 together, maybe 4 of you together, and how that has the power to transform not only the lives of the individuals impacted by that, but the lives of the people that they get to be in relationship with, whether that's at work or in their social settings or in their family systems. And in a way, it sounds a bit rose-colored glasses, but in a way, I think that's what we were supposed to be up to right from the beginning. And we've been faithful with the things that we were given, but there's been some shedding of some of those. What did you call it? You might not have all the fancy things or something in some of the spaces. So yeah, we might not have all the fancy things, but if we're still being faithful with the pearls and the good things that God has poured into our life, and if we get to, by our outpouring, get to offer that to someone else, I think that's such a gift and such grace that can be extended into this world that so very much needs some of that.
Yeah, you mentioned Bill Easum earlier. I remember the one very clear thing I remembered I was at that seminar when we had him up here, and he said they had a line at their church that they repeated often, which was that God's love always comes to us on its way to someone else. And that became their theme. And so if everyone embraced that idea, God's love's coming to them on its way to someone else, that's a pretty good missional posture, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and to know that, if we want to know the way in a very simplistic way, if we want to know what God looks like, we look at Jesus. And if we want to know what Jesus looks like, hopefully he's seen in the light that shines from those who try to follow him. And if that's not happening, then something's getting disrupted in the mix. And so I think the spirit of our conversation, Glenn, is always about how do we continue to be faithful with the things that we've been given? How do we be that flow through as you describe it? And how do we follow Jesus, who we seem to enjoy hanging out with people who are still trying to figure out how to follow him. I'm grateful for your friendship and grateful for the fact that we did get introduced in a variety of different ways. And I think if we have someone to accompany us in our life of faith, in our life of ministry, just in our life, at whatever stage that is, I think that is truly a blessing from God. And so I've really appreciated this conversation.
Thanks, John. Thanks for inviting me. And hopefully there's a few takeaways for some folk that would be of encouragement or of use. And thanks for what you're doing with Ministry Forum. And now that you're a man with $1 million, everyone will want to be your friend. So,
we've got a lot more new friends.
Yes, suddenly. Yeah. But what an amazing opportunity to continue this sense of resourcing, and so let's continue to work together.
Yeah, and certainly as a part of how we understand that whole granting process, and yes, it sounds like it is a lot of money, um, but we're really trying to see it as an expansion of the work that we're already doing in that theme of
Sure.
you're not alone, and also just really tangibly trying to find a way like a lot of the language in our grant request was about accompaniment, coming alongside ministry leaders and congregations, and trying to support them in the work that they're doing. So that they don't feel alone, and also so that they can benefit from that, and that we can richly learn from that experience and hopefully pass that on to others. Now, Glen, because I know you, I didn't mention, but I will as we close today. I did in the intro say the Reverend Doctor, because you were awarded an honorary doctorate from Knox College, your alma mater. Um, and I want to say, because I know you don't feel comfortable always saying these kind of things, of tooting your own horn, as it were. But if I could toot your horn just briefly, I want to say that, hopefully from this conversation that people hear, if they've just met you for the first time, but knowing you for as long as I have, it is they call it honorary. It is an honor that's bestowed on somebody who has been, um, just faithful in the ways in which they've tried to practice their own faith out loud publicly, but also in the places where they've provided leadership. And I know that you've been a gift in all the communities that you've been a part of, and continue to be a gift in the community where you've truly planted yourself, and provided that stability as a good neighbor, as a good friend, as a good human in the city where you are planted. So I hope you appreciate the weight of that DD, as it were, but also know that it comes with a lot of respect and a lot of appreciation for the ways in which you've diligently served and answered that call so long ago as that little boy who was super excited about church, and are continuing to be excited about church in the new ways that God is creating that, right?
Yeah. Thanks, John. I certainly was completely gobsmacked when Principal Van Eck called me, and I don't want to be falsely modest. I feel like it was pretty cool for this sense of my alma mater, who trained me for ministry, and those good profs and administrators and all who all had their hand in that, felt that they thought they had made a good choice in allowing me to do that, and that it looked good on their work. So what a cool thing. And I don't take it lightly. I don't certainly refer to myself as doctor, but I think that in the hierarchies of our church, there are times and places where people like to use that language, and maybe it is that recognition that the system isn't completely broken, that it has ways in which we can support and encourage one another. So I receive that as a gift, and hopefully I can continue to honor it through whatever work I have left to give and offer. So, yeah.
Well, Glen, all the best in the things you do. May you continue to practice joy in those spaces you occupy, and may people find in your practicing joy in their hearts as well. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Ministry Forum podcast.
Thanks, John.
Thanks for joining us on the Ministry Forum podcast. We hope today's episode encouraged you and reminded you that you are not alone in ministry. If this episode resonated, tell someone. Please don't keep us a secret. And if you can, subscribe, rate, or leave a review wherever you listen. It helps us reach more ministry leaders just like you. And honestly, it reminds us that we're not alone either. Find more resources and ways to connect at ministryforum.ca, and follow us on social media at Ministry Forum. Until next time, may God's strength and courage be yours. May you be fearless, not reckless. And may you be well in body, mind, and spirit. And may you be at peace.